Welcome to today's Explainer. I am so thrilled to have you here. Today, we are unpacking an incredibly profound theological debate. We're going to explore the limits of human vision, the nature of divine revelation, and a major historical friction point between traditional Christianity and the Latter-day Saint faith. We'll look closely at the text, examine the core assumptions on both sides, and see exactly how different interpretive lenses can completely change the way we read Scripture. So let's jump right in. Okay, here is the core question we're looking at today. Back in 1820, Joseph Smith claimed to have a profound encounter, known as the First Vision, where he literally saw both God the Father and Jesus Christ. But for many Christians, this claim immediately hits a massive scriptural roadblock. I'm talking specifically about two verses in the New Testament, 1 Timothy 6:16 and John 6:46. Critics frequently point to these verses to argue that God the Father is fundamentally invisible to humanity. So, does the Bible definitively rule out Joseph Smith's claim? Let's find out. Part 1. The First Vision Challenged. To really grasp this debate, we've got to start by looking fairly at the challenge itself. There is a very common, historically grounded objection raised by critics, most prominently represented by Christian apologist Matt Slick. The argument here is straightforward, and on its surface, it makes complete sense. Step 1. The Bible explicitly says God cannot be seen. Step 2. Joseph Smith claims he saw God the Father. Step 3. Therefore, Joseph Smith's claim contradicts the Bible, meaning the first vision must be false. If we accept that first premise as a universal, zero exceptions rule, while the conclusion is practically flawless. Let's actually look at the text behind that first premise. 1 Timothy 6:16 says God dwells in unapproachable light, and is someone whom no man hath seen nor can see. You can easily see why this is such a load-bearing verse for Matt Slick's argument, right? Read plainly, it really sounds like an absolute, flat, metaphysical prohibition. Like God the Father simply cannot be seen by human eyes. Period. And this is compounded by our second scriptural anchor, John 6:46. Here, Jesus himself says, "Not that any man had seen the Father, save he which is of God, he had seen the Father." Slick uses this to point out that not only is God unapproachable, but Jesus explicitly taught that no ordinary human has seen the Father. Only Jesus, the one from God, has that kind of access. Honestly, treating these texts as a universal rule is a logically strong move within this framework. Part 2. The biblical pattern of glory. Now, to analyze this debate impartially, we can't just isolate two verses. We really need to zoom out and look at the broader biblical landscape. How does God actually interact with humanity throughout Scripture? If we approach the text by asking a slightly different question, the whole paradigm kind of shifts. Instead of just asking, is God visible or invisible, which treats it like a simple on and off switch, the deeper question is, how does God choose to make himself known to human beings? Because, the Bible doesn't usually give us abstract metaphysical definitions of God. It reveals him through relationships, covenants, and direct divine actions. So, a crucial key here is understanding the Hebrew concept of kabod, or divine glory. In the Old Testament, God's presence is constantly associated with clouds, fire, brightness, and intense holiness. And this glory acts kind of like a veil. It simultaneously reveals that God is present, but it conceals him to protect fallen, mortal beings from being completely consumed by his raw holiness. So the issue might not be that God lacks a visible form, it's that his absolute holiness has to be mediated for our own safety. Plus, if God is universally impossible to see, we run into some immediate, heavy scriptural constraints. Moses is said to have spoken with God face to face. Isaiah saw the Lord enthroned. And perhaps most pressingly, in Acts chapter 7, Stephen, after the resurrection and ascension of Jesus, looks up into heaven and literally sees the Son of Man standing at the right hand of God. This creates a real pressure point against the idea of absolute categorical invisibility. Part 3. Unneeded access versus enabled vision. So how do we resolve this tension? The tension between verses that say no man can see God and verses that describe prophets having these profound visual encounters with the divine. Well, think of it like looking at the sun. If you just stare at the sun with your ordinary unaided eyes, it's going to blind you. It is unapproachable. But that doesn't mean the sun is invisible, right? If you use a specialized solar filter, you can behold it clearly. It's a similar concept here. Ordinary, mortal access to God's glory is impossible. But through divinely enabled vision, God can strengthen, shield, or transfigure a human recipient so they can actually endure his presence. The idea here is that God reveals himself according to his own purposes. He isn't bound by our limitations. Whether it's through a specific prophetic calling, a divine shielding, or a physical transfiguration, God can accommodate human capacity.
These divinely enabled conditions don't break the rule of mortal limitation. Rather, they are miraculous exceptions authored by God Himself.
Part 4. Reevaluating the evidence. Armed with this wider lens, this understanding of divine glory and enabled vision, let's zoom back in and reevaluate those two original verses used to challenge the first vision. Let's look at 1 Timothy 6:16 again. Notice the text specifically says God dwells in unapproachable light. It literally gives us the reason for the invisibility claim. This strongly suggests we're dealing with a glory and access problem. It firmly teaches that unaided mortals cannot endure God's glory on their own terms. But to say this verse proves God can never, under any miraculous circumstance, choose to reveal Himself, well, that might be overextending what the text actually requires. Now let's apply this to John 6:46. Jesus says, "No one has seen the Father except the one from God." This absolutely establishes that no ordinary human in history has the kind of direct, native, intimate access to the Father that the Son possesses. Jesus is entirely unique in His knowledge and origin. But ruling out ordinary native access doesn't necessarily act as an absolute ban on all possible visionary, accommodated exceptions where God actively chooses to pull back the veil. So the absolutely crucial point here is recognizing the interpretive lenses being used. Neither side is reading these texts in a total vacuum. The Protestant framework often reads Old Testament appearances of God as pre-incarnate appearances of Christ, interpreting them through a later Trinitarian lens to harmonize the text. Meanwhile, the Latter-day Saint framework reads those exact same biblical texts through the lens of modern LDS revelation, like the first vision, to harmonize the text. Both sides are bringing their own deeply held frameworks to make sense of Scripture. Which brings us to a really fascinating thought experiment regarding motive. Let's say the LDS framework is correct. If historical, post-biblical theology accidentally collapsed the physical distinction between the Father and the Son, rendering the Father metaphysically invisible and inaccessible, then God would have a highly specific motive to act. A direct, visually distinct manifestation of both the Father and the Son together would actually be the ultimate, fitting way to correct that profound doctrinal misalignment. And that leaves us with this final, lingering question. If human frameworks had truly fundamentally misunderstood the nature, the embodiment, and the relational identity of God, how would He choose to break through that confusion and make Himself known? Would He remain hidden, or would He part the heavens? I hope this explainer has given you a fresh, structured way to look at this profound debate. Keep asking questions, keep exploring the texts, and I'll see you next time.